Welcome to This Week in Hastings Headline History, where we take a look back at what was making news around Hastings, Florida over a century ago. These are stories directly out of the pages of the Hastings Herald, which was published weekly in the early 1900s. It's fascinating to hear what they were talking about, as well as how they spoke in their articles from over 100 years ago. So sit back and enjoy as I share with you a few of the articles from this week in 1920. Teachers in St. Johns County will be paid larger salaries. A policy of paying as adequate salaries as are possible has been adopted by the Board of Public Instruction of St. Johns County, and as a result, there's every reason to believe the city and county schools for the coming year will be stronger and better than ever before. Negotiations have been in progress between the county and superintendent and scores of teachers throughout the county, but always the question of insufficient salaries loomed up to prevent closing arrangements for teaching in St. Augustine, Hastings, and St. Johns County during the next school term. The old basis was $480 to $540 per year, and less than 2 years ago this was increased to $600 a year for Hastings and the St. Augustine schools, while the county schools were less because of a shorter term than 8 months. By formal action of the board taken at the regular August meeting on Tuesday, the minimum for the lower grades in the larger school is $90 per month for the 8 months term, which is $720 a year, with the salary of $100 a month for 8 months or $800 a year for the 7th and 8th grades. The high school basis is to be $150 per month for 8 months or $1,200 a year. The assistant principal is to receive $175 per month for the 8 months, and the principal $250 a month. Pressure had been brought to bear on members of the board for several months past by school patrons and public-spirited citizens from all sections of St. Johns County, who have urged that the teachers of St. John's be given higher salaries. Some even have gone so far as to promise their personal assistance should there be a deficit at the end of the school year. New store to open. A new general grocery store and meat market is being made ready for business in the store adjoining the hardware department of the Hastings Cooperative Company. The new store will be operated by a newcomer in Hastings and will be ready for business either today or early next week. Special Masonic event celebrated. Friday evening of last week marked a special event for the Hastings Lodge of Masons, the occasion being a special communication in their hall where they were visited by M.W. Marcus Endell of Jacksonville, the past Grand Master of Florida. In addition to the local members, about 30 visiting Masons from St. Augustine and Palatka were present. Work in the third degree was exemplified. Eloquent addresses were made by the distinguished visitors, and following the work, evening refreshments were served. Here's an interesting story from the 1920 paper. In a time before emails and when phone calls were pricey, often news came from the mail, like this road report of what things were like a few states north. Found roads good. R.T. Hewitt, who is spending his vacation on a motor tour through the Carolinas, writes that he has found the roads in fine shape. Those from Greenville, South Carolina to Hendersonville, North Carolina, he says, are in remarkably fine shape. He states the weather has been so cool he found it necessary to have a fire in the heater in his room. Now it's time for Talk of the Times, where I give you a glimpse of what people were thinking over 100 years ago. This time I have an editorial from the Hastings Herald in 1920. It was picking at the findings of a doctor who said women are turning men into wimps. It's titled, "He Calls Us Sissies," and it reads, "Out in Chicago, where somebody is always discovering something important, Dr. William J. Hickson, head of the city's psychopathic laboratory, announced that he has learned the secret of why men of America have become so meek and docile in accepting every imposition and injustice that is thrust upon them. The root of the evil, says Dr. Hickson, is nothing more or less than woman. Says he, we shall all be sissies by and by. The war started and prohibition is finishing the job, and all because of woman. According to Dr. Hickson's theory, the war brought woman into prominence. Women of all ages and stations sat on committees and wore uniforms, varying in stern garb of the elderly dowager to the chic, dearest young thing you ever saw. Carrying his theory further, Dr. Hickson seems to imply that, as all the real men of the country were away in the army, The only persons of male persuasion remaining behind to serve on committees were the weakest and the unfit, over whom the women quickly gained ascendancy. As an example, he points out the manner in which prohibition was shoved across. The women backed it. Of course, not all the women who backed it wore skirts, he intimates. Some of them really would have been termed old women in trousers, but his opinion seems to be that they all belong in the same class. Thus, it appears we are headed full tilt for the rocks of degeneracy and deterioration. We are doomed to become sissies and mollycoddles, and the only reason we do not grow wings and become angels is because our constitutions have become too weakened to grow anything except weary. And for all this, lovely woman is to blame, according to the doctor. Woman has taken over the men's rights and privileges with a free hand, and now that he has been released from the army and desires to resume his proper sphere, she refuses to abdicate in his favor. She desires to vote with him. She has taken his job. She smokes his cigarettes while occupying his favorite seat in the restaurant. She runs for political office and sometimes gets it. And in short, she does all manner of disconcerting things. The result is that man stands goggle-eyed and wonders what will happen. He is not yet becoming a sissy, as the doctor intimates, but is merely overcome by amazement and has been unable, as yet, to get his bearings or adapt himself to new conditions. Prohibition hasn't made sissies of the American male, nor will it ever do so. Instead, it is far more likely to make a fox of him, for in all probability there exists nowhere in this country a man who really thirsts for some of the old oil of joy, and thirsts in vain. If he can obtain it no other way, he'll make it himself. And they do say that some of the amateur makers of the stuff are really most proficient and expert in the art. Neither will women make a sissy of him. That some women in the old maiden ladies and unoccupied females with more theories and experience would like to do so is undeniable. However, man as a whole is not especially interested in the desires of that type of the opposite sex. He is more concerned with the younger unattached women, if he is a bachelor, or with the ideas of one particular woman, and she's usually very particular if he is married. History and experience show us the type of woman in which man is most interested has never leaned strongly towards sissies. The natural inference is that it never will. If man should show any tendency in that direction, there is no doubt that he'll be yanked back with a firm hand and set right with a sharp tongue. Thus, with all due respect to the doctor and his learning, there seems to be a strong question in the present instance as to whether he has not really made a discovery he cannot demonstrate and proclaimed the theory he is unable to back up. Perhaps the doctor has been sticking too closely to his desk of late. If he will take a walk after dark at one of the number of streets in his own city of Chicago, he will undoubtedly encounter numerous male beings who can convince him, without any solicitation on his part, that they neither are the sissies now nor show any indication of becoming such. I hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Hastings Headline History. This podcast was brought to you by Presenting the Past, bringing history back to the present through historic presentations and the sale of treasures from days gone by. This episode was written and produced by me, Michelle Murillo, with the aid of vintage copies of the Hastings Herald. Now it's time for this week's musical memory, when we listen back to a song that everyone was listening to 100 years ago. This week we're going to hear a man who was considered the bridge between the old and the new in the early 1900s. David Harrison Macon, known professionally as Uncle Dave Macon, was a singer, songwriter, and comedian. He had an old American folk style to his music, well known from the 1800s, but he also tweaked his performances to fit in well with the vaudeville arena in the early 1900s. And he was a vision. Gold teeth, a plug hat, scraggly whiskers. It earned him the name, the Dixie Dewdrop. He really was likely one of the grandfathers of country music, and he was the first superstar of the Grand Ole Opry. So let's listen to one of his songs that was so popular in the 1920s, titled Keep My Skillet Good and Greasy.
I lay around your shanty all the time. I've chickens in my sack, bloodhounds on my track. I'm pulling for my shanty, home, home, home. I'm pulling for my shanty. They beat me to the door, I put 'em under the floor. Keep my skillet good and greasy all the time, time. Keep my skillet good and greasy all the time. I was walking down the street and I saw a ham of meat. Got my skillet good and greasy all the time, time, time. Got my skillet good and greasy all the time. I was going to the hills, find a balmy jug of brandy, going to give it all to Mandy. Keep her good and drunk and woozy all the time, time, time. Keep her good and drunk and woozy all the time. There's a nigger on the log, a finger on the trigger, and eye on the hope. Gun eats when flip, and the bullet eats when slip. Fall on the hog with all of his grip. Got my skillet good and greasy all the time, time, time. Got my skillet good and greasy all the time.